E3 is one of my favorite events of the entire year. It's a time where games are celebrated and we sometimes get a good look at what games are coming our way. Unless you're watching the Nintendo Direct, where some games release later that same day. I try to make myself available for the weekend press conferences before the actual E3 begins. I'm talking of course about Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, Ubisoft, EA, Square Enix, Bethesda, and the PC Game Show. These 1 or so hour showcases are ones that I anticipate many months ahead of time. And do they always deliver? No, they don't.
So, obviously Todd sold the big vision at E3 last year, had a launch which, was not the finest hour.
Yep.
Sony and Nintendo are usually the ones we all look forward to, but in the past couple of years, I believe Microsoft has started to put on one hell of a show to join, and even compete in quality with the other big dogs. E3 2019's Xbox showcase was, in my opinion, not as spectacular as last year's, but it did have quite a bit to offer. One game in particular was something my Discord chat was howling to be Evil Dead, myself included. So it came to all of our surprises when the trees somehow shifted themselves to behold the infamous Blair Witch logo. We didn't see much other than small clips of what actually looked like gameplay, and the majority of this year's E3 was much of the same. But nevertheless, I was interested. I was so interested that I actually became disappointed to find out the game didn't release at midnight on August 30th, but rather 12 PM that same day. Blair Witch, where do I begin?
Okay, Bullet, let's find this kid.
2004 was a very interesting year for me. The Boston Red Sox had just won the World Series, Halo 2, and I watched the Blair Witch Project for the first time. And honestly, my first time watching it, I wasn't very scared, I was more bored than anything. But again, I was a kid, and all I thought about at the time was literally Halo 2 coming out very soon. But I'm pretty sure this is a thing a lot of people agree with. Those last few minutes in the Blair Witch Project are downright terrifying. And that's when it all sank in. I literally thought it was real. I can't imagine the horror the audience had when they saw it in the theaters back in 1999. And after a few days of being scared of some witch in Maryland about 8 hours from me, driving distance, I forgot about it entirely. Again, mainly because of Halo 2. I didn't think about Blair Witch for years and years. I didn't even go see the 2016 reboot remake or whatever from the same guy who did the Death Note Netflix movie, so I really don't think I'm missing out. It was only until a couple of months ago, around June or July this year, that I started really diving into the phenomenon that is Blair Witch. Of course, as I grew older, I understood that it's more of a concept rather than a big spooky witch, so as I read more and more for this video so I don't sound like an idiot, I became super interested in the entire thing, which made my hype level for this new Blair Witch game go from to counting down the days of its impending release. The game was developed by Bloober Team, based out in Krakow, Poland, the same team behind the Layers of Fear games and my personal favorite from 2017, Observer. Blair Witch takes place in 1996, 2 years after the setting time for the Blair Witch Project. You take on the role of Ellis Lynch, an ex-police officer and Army veteran, with his trusty dog and best friend Bullet. The two of you head out to the woods of Burkittsville, Maryland to meet up with your old police buddies to aid in the search of a 9-year-old boy named Peter Shannon, who has gone missing. Right off the bat, it's clear that the search party doesn't want Ellis in the woods with them, and it's also clear to you why they act so hesitant as Sheriff Lanning asks Ellis if his health problems are going to be an issue.
Ellis to base. Did you copy?
Ellis, what are you doing out here?
Joining the search party.
Ellis, if you think you got some obligation to be here, you don't. I mean, I know it's his brother and all.
Sir, I'm here to help. That's all there is to it. Bullet's with me. If he catches the scent, he'll lead us straight to the kid.
You got a point there. You think you're up for it? Your health issues, they're not going gonna be a problem?
Ellis isn't well mentally, and as time passes you'll see exactly what Lanning was worried about, but we'll touch on that subject later. Ellis reassures Lanning and the search party that it's all good, he's trying to prove them wrong. The beginning of the game is pretty tame and succeeds in giving you that false sense of security. You hear constant chatter from the search party, you have your 90s phone, which you could play Snake on among other things for entertainment, and I was pleasantly surprised to see you could also call your vet, who asks if Bullet needs to come in for his little ear thing, or even prank the pizza guy, and these small details are things I really give brownie points for. They don't offer anything to the core game itself, but to see these small things added is just charming. And last but not least, you have your dog Bullet, who is, in fact, a good boy. As time goes on, you'll begin to periodically lose signal on both your phone and radio, which means you can no longer hear your distant search party comrades chatting amongst themselves, and you can no longer call the pizza man. But most importantly, you can't call Jess. Jess, as far as we know, is Ellis's former love interest. She'll call you repeatedly throughout the game and also request for you to give her a call from time to time, which I always made sure of reminding myself to do so. You can also either deny and accept incoming calls from both your radio and phone, but I made sure I answered every incoming call because I was terrified of getting a bad ending. I didn't know what could cause a good and bad ending, all I knew at the time was that it also depended on how you treated Bullet. So I always kept him close, and I answered every phone call. Bullet would also whine in fear over the stick things notorious in Blair Witch, so of course, if he was unhappy, I would get rid of him. I made sure to keep Bullet happy. That was the most logical thing for me to do, which was honestly tough. I'm not talking about it being a chore to give him pets and tell him how handsome he was. I'm talking about the choice wheel needed to prompt myself to actually pet him. I'd constantly accidentally tell him to stay when I wanted to pet him, or tell him to search, and I even accidentally reprimanded him when I wanted to pet him. If Bloober made it so imperative to treat Bullet good, why did they make such a crappy, sensitive to wind wheel choice tool? Why even add a reprimand button at all? If not for Bullet, you wouldn't make it 10 feet in this forest without stumbling all over yourself, which is exactly what happens in sequences where Bullet disappears. I hate to say it, but I loved these sections more than when I had Bullet at my side. See, this game is supposed to be scary. No matter what, when Bullet was at my side, I felt safe. A little tense, but ultimately safe, which is the opposite of how you want to feel when playing a horror game. Bullet is there not to just make me feel safe, but also there to help Ellis not go mad. And as I mentioned before, Ellis is not well. Anytime Bullet disappears, Ellis begins to worry. Not only that, that's when he's left alone in his own head. He starts to panic and his inner demons begin to take hold. Which is why I like these parts so much. It really showed you, the player, just how important Bullet is, beyond him just being a search button. I understand what they were going for, but ultimately it doesn't work. I'm just not scared. When Ellis experiences these panic attacks, he also has visions of his past mistakes in his life, either with his ex-lover Jess, where it shows them arguing and Ellis being aggressive towards her verbally, or vague instances when he was an on-duty cop, or even when he was in the military, and that one they focus on a lot, probably a little too much. In fact, they do it so much with almost no prior info that you kind of just don't care. Every time you get thrown into the flashbacks, you're just waiting to progress further. I get that Blooper's trying to show you how and what screwed Ellis up, but if you keep showing me Ellis going down a corridor in a war zone multiple times, it's not going to tell me anything other than he went to war. You see a fellow soldier die in one instance, and that's about it. They really hammer it in towards the end of the game too, naming what I can only guess to be your former squad that you got killed or something. But because they barely touched on it until the end, you just don't care. During a lot of these reminders of his past, there's always a quick zoom of a woman's eyes and her shriek. Obviously it's vague and it's supposed to be that way, but after a while it becomes annoying to be at the end of every single flashback, and at one point I just wanted the game to tell me what it was dangling in front of my face. The worst part is that, like I said, it happens every flashback. When you finally find out why you keep seeing it, you wonder why it even happened in the first place with flashbacks that had nothing to do with it. This game has plenty of chapters, but the majority of them will be spent wandering around the woods, losing and gaining signal to your phone and walkie-talkie, pleading with Bullet not to run off too far, and continuing to search for clues relating to the reason you're even there in the first place, to find Peter. The way Bloober has you go about this, aside from Bullet finding important clues, is a camera. It's an ordinary camera for the most part, but the red tapes associated with it are what's really interesting. You're not just viewing past experiences recorded, you're viewing them and manipulating them in your current time to aid you in your progression. You can make a fallen tree blocking your path rise back up as if it even never fell. You can make objects appear in the video that aren't in your reality. The time manipulating camera was the most innovative and interesting tool for detective work that I've ever used in a video game. Watching the tapes to see where an event led to seeing someone close a door just for you to rewind the tape for the door to be open, it's all brilliant. The camera idea is unique and I honestly love it. Blooper in each of their games so far have introduced interesting ideas that really have made the game shine in more ways than one. But with the good, there's also the bad. Blooper seems to have an issue with pacing and unneeded sections, basically filler. Blair Witch is absolutely no exception. Okay, so obviously given the title you would expect to be in the woods a lot. The woods is not the problem, in fact, the woods is executed perfectly. Usually throughout the playthrough you'll be presented with a problem that you need to solve. Let's call this the center. And from the center you'll have multiple branching pathways that you can take that will lead you to your next area. And only one of those areas is actually the correct path. Since you're in the woods, it would be incredibly frustrating to pick a path and come to a dead end, which would be the way the game tells you that you need to go back, you went the wrong way. What Blair Witch does instead is loop you, and you have no idea it even happened. So if you go down this way far enough, the game will loop you in a circle all the way back to the center. This definitely halts the frustration I mentioned earlier. But with that said, allow me to backtrack to the pacing and filler issue. Somehow a lot of these sequences you have to do feel like they really shouldn't take as long as they do, or even be in the game at all for that matter. One sequence in particular involves you running through a part of the forest that's a little more open with several mounds scattered throughout. The reason for these mounds are because of these leaf monster balls. They roam the flat ground around you and you need to run from mound to mound to avoid them. And the entire time I did this section, bullets were also flying at me, along with a bunch of military callouts, obviously showing you that Ellis is once again having a military flashback. I didn't care about any of that. I was wondering why this specific section was even here. It's so different from the tone of the rest of the game, and I just wanted it to be over. This part lasts so long and I just couldn't stand it. Then they attempt to wrap it up by putting you in yet another fight with the tree people, where you flash your light to defeat them, very Alan Wake style. This also happens a lot. It's pretty intense the first time, I would say, but after the third or fourth time I just didn't feel anything. You stand in one spot while Bullet becomes your aim assistant, he glides on the ground next to you so that you can see where you need to aim your flashlight, you point said light at the tree monster shaking violently behind a tree, and they just run off. That's it, you win. This, along with the leaf monster parts, immediately knock you out of the creepy immersion the game spends so long trying to suck you into. So it basically goes from just wandering the scary woods in the dark to wondering when is the next encounter going to pop up. It's disappointing that these instances are done so poorly when the rest of the time in the woods is generally good. A certain part where you're guided in the fog by a man on your walkie-talkie as to not run into the dormant tree people is honestly incredible. You have to use your viewfinder on your camera to see if you're getting too close to them, as sometimes the voice on the walkie-talkie will stop helping you. Sections like this are when Bloober are at the top of their game. The part when the original Blair Witch house flashes in the lightning thunder crashing around you and you just sitting there thinking, holy hell, I have to go in there, are moments that will stick with me when I think of this game. But that's the problem. Bloober filled this game with sections that are really good and then also added sections that are really bad. It kind of feels like they just took whatever came to mind and just did it all to see what sticks. In Observer, you mainly walk hallways and talk to people gathering clues among the stereotypical walking sim style games, but these parts are so rich with narrative and detail you just want to keep learning more and more about the mystery at hand. And then later in the game you're forced to hide from a monster Amnesia style. Why? Why is this here? This is the exact feeling you get in the Blair Witch, almost the entire time. So, I'm going to continue on this more, but this will get more into spoiler territory from here on out, so this is your official warning. Remember that thing people would say about this game that played it? How the final chapter is where the meat is? This is the part where you finally get to enter the same house featured in the Blair Witch Project. This is what people said was the real scary part, that Bloober were saving the best for last. Those who would say this would not be wrong, but they aren't right either. Upon playing the game, I had friends who had finished it before me tell me vague things like I was afraid to look up, and that sort of stuff, which had me really interested. Fortunately, when the house is revealed to you, it's done so well, as I mentioned before. You approach the entrance and all of a sudden the game just feels a little bit different. The atmosphere grows darker, the air is still, and most importantly, Bullet is no longer with you. When I realized this, I truly thought that Bloober really did save the best for last. But unfortunately, I was wrong. Even with Bullet gone, it's just the same old shit, but dragged out to an unbelievable degree. This whole section would have been perfect if it were a 15 to 20 minute horror fest, but instead it's all of what you've experienced in the woods, but just in greater detail. All of the flashbacks come to a close, mysteries get solved that you encountered in the woods, and you finally get the full picture of why Ellis is the way that he is. And truly, all that he's went through is awful, and I do feel bad, but at the same time, I just don't care. I don't care about Ellis. I don't care what he's gone through. It's because of how Blair Witch eased you onto these things. He has juggled so much in his life, but for 90% of the game, you just get vague flashbacks of this thing and that thing, so much that it all blurs together to make you think, yeah, I get it, he's had a troubled past. Earlier, before you reach the house, you piece together that the witch is, in fact, messing with Ellis's already damaged mind, which is again explored further in the house. It feels as if Ellis was created with these issues so that they could use an excuse as to even use the Blair Witch and make her relevant to any of this. Honestly, it's sloppy, and it's weak. Now, other than the shoehorned mental illness, you traverse the house to ultimately complete the objective of finding Peter, the plot that almost became an instant subplot. You wander the house, use the camera mechanic to get through obstacles blocking your path, and guess what? You avoid a monster. In this instance, it's not as bad as Observer, I'll give it that. It's fitting. It's also done in a clever way. You once again use your viewfinder to follow this white line left for you, and you are required to stare at the line as the monster lurks around you. The reason for this is because the monster will only kill you if you look at it or get close. So it becomes not as easy as just following the line. You have to gauge where this enemy is, which forces you to slightly peek at him just to see where he is at the time. It's honestly terrifying, and when my friend said that he didn't look up, I knew the feeling he got. Somehow, even this was screwed up, and stick with me on this, not by design, but by occurrence. This happens far too many times that the terror and the thrill withers away again by the third experience. As I said, if this whole final act of the game were a 15-minute runtime, the response from players would be much more positive. You're in this house for about an hour, maybe more, and more of the good and bad are thrown about. Seeing what sticks. An hour of this is just too long, and you start to feel the fatigue that you did in the chapters before it. Why is this still going on, you'll ask yourself again, as you did before in other instances where things dragged out way more than needed. So all the intrigue and hype I had for the final act was honestly dead. Again, there are times where it's amazing in this house, like when you have to fight the urge to look at the witch herself as she whispers in your ear to turn around, and the game even takes control out of your hands temporarily and you have to fight the game as it's making you try to turn and face her. If you cut out all the times where it's long and boring and just leave the good, you'll probably get what I said would be perfect, a short and fast experience. So after so many ups and downs with Blair Witch, how does it all boil down? How does it all end? Well, I'll cut straight to it. The ending, or endings, all of them, are really, really bad. Let's start with how you can obtain these endings. For once, yes, the endings do depend on how you treated Bullet in your playthrough, but even if you treated Bullet as if he were your own dog, you can still get the bad ending. How? It matters on an ending section where you defeat the tree monsters. If you kill any of them, that's the bad ending. Like, what are we doing? To clarify, there's a good ending, a bad Bullet ending, a good ending, a good bullet ending, and the same for the bad endings. And even a secret ending that is so pointless that I'm not even going to waste time talking about it. It's seriously pointless. I'll go over my ending specifically. The man I mentioned earlier in the radio talking to you in the non-spoiler talk was Carver. He's being controlled by the witch basically, and he's trying to trick you to give into your anger so that he can pass the curse onto you, so that you will be the witch's slave essentially. I burned all of the tree monsters in the house, so I guess I succumbed to the witch and now I'm Carver for some reason after I kill him. But I treated Bullet well, so he's still alright with me, but he leaves as well and is later rescued. They also wrap up the useless Jess storyline by putting some BS white text on a black screen at the end just to close it out. The ending as a whole for the Blair Witch is honestly a slap in the face for anyone who spent 5 to 6 hours in Blooper's handcrafted world. And it pains me to say this, but I really wanted Blair Witch to be a hit. But it's just a mediocre, straight-to-the-pitcher's glove bunt. The conclusion to Blair Witch made me instantly not care about anything that took place hours ago when I started my journey, all the way to the bitter end. I wondered if I would go through again to experience the different endings, but I don't think I'll be visiting the woods of Burkittsville anytime soon. At least, not when Bloober is pulling the strings.